We are honoured to have Martina Anderson, our M.E.P. Martina was born in the Bogside of Derry, and she has been involved with the Republican movement for over 30 years. She spent 13 years of that in prisons in England and in Ireland until her release under the terms of the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. She became involved upon her release with Sinn Féin. She was elected in 2007 as an Assembly member for the Foyle constituency representing her hometown of Derry, at which point she was then nominated as one of the first Sinn Féin members of the Policing Board. In 2011, she was made Junior Minister in the office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, working alongside her colleague Martin McGuinness. In 2012, she was proposed by the party's 6th county executive as a replacement for Barbara de Bruin in the party's member of the European Parliament. So put your hands together, please, for Martina Anderson.
Go mille agah Tomaintach Sasta Féin Shaw Linanocht. I want to thank all of the organisers for the opportunity to address you all here this evening. And I think, Catherine, I don't know what kind of pull that you have to get all of the women here, particularly from the north, but obviously I think if we had it, we should bottle it because that was no mean achievement. I know that your mummy is here with us here this evening, so you probably got some of that influence from herself. I know that yourself and Helen has done sterling amount of work to organise this event and to get us where we are here, and I think the turnout has been absolutely amazing, and I know you must be very, very pleased with that. It's very difficult to know how you follow, particularly Joan. When I was sitting listening to your story, and I had the honour and the privilege of having you over in Brussels along with a number of other equally powerful women like yourself, who thankfully, as a consequence of being able to engage with each other, formed the kind of struggle that you did, with people coming together to tell not just their story, but the strength that you got from each other. And it's amazing listening to you, all that you have come through, and absolutely shameful. I think that here in Ireland, where around the world we are sort of acknowledged for being friendly people who look out for each other and care for each other, and then you hear horrendous stories like we've heard from Joan, and we need to hang our heads in shame. The state and its people, because its people have been observers to what is going on and what has went on, and it is simply not good enough. I know that there's been a number of great people who have come out of this constituency, and I couldn't stand here this evening without mentioning someone who is very, very close to myself, who influenced me particularly throughout the 13 and a half years that we were in prison together, and that's Ella O'Dwyer. Ella O'Dwyer from Tipperary and Nina is, I would say, the most intelligent person, not woman, the most intelligent Republican person that we have had in our struggle. And it's unfortunate that she's not here with us here this evening, but I know that she will be wishing us all well, and I know that she's very, very proud of Catherine and Helen and everyone else that's been involved in organising this. Another great woman from this constituency is Sinn Féin M.E.P. Leonie Rita. And I know she was hoping to be here this evening, but she's out sort of walking the walk and talking the talk with Sinn Féin TD Martin Ferris. They're doing a bit of a road show here at the moment. And she's wishing us all well, and she said to especially say to Sheila Dara that you really make sure we all behave ourselves tonight. So I said I'd pass that on to Sheila, but I don't know if Sheila's the one that's going to ensure that that happens. And I have to say, we were talking about it, I'm just back from Brussels, flew in the early hours of the morning from Strasbourg. And yesterday evening before we left, we were saying to another MEP, Matt Carthy, about different things what we were doing this weekend, and I was saying I was coming here to Clonmel, and Matt said to me, you know, I lived in Clonmel. He lived here as a child. I didn't know this. So he goes on to tell me the years I was here. Mary Doyle's going to be hit with the growing old syndrome, just like I was. Because Mary, I asked him, he was sort of saying about you being here and you speaking or whatever in the 1980 hunger strike, and the role you played in that in 1981. So I asked, I says, Matt, and what age were you, in 1980 and 1981? And he says to me, 3. Sweet light of divine Jesus. And the elephant is going 3, I thought he's 13 or something, 3. So, and we're all here this evening and just listening to what Jennifer had to say. I think it's crucially important that that's repeated, because I know that Jennifer's story and the story, the personal story that Catherine has asked me to share with you today, it's, when you were listening to Joan, I thought, God almighty, how do you follow that? But it's, our stories aren't unique, and you almost get embarrassed sometimes or awkward, or, when people are asking you to come up to talk about your own story, because there are just so many Republican women who have personally, influenced me. And to be honest with you, the vast majority of them are sitting in front of me here tonight. Sadie and Lynn from Derry, from my own hometown, and Marie Doherty, another one from Derry. They're just slightly a wee bit older than I. Not much, but when I was sort of growing up and sort of involving myself, they were women in Derry that had a great influence in people like myself. Sheila Dara, who's here, and Sinead, who I've become more friendly with since after we both got out of prison. But again, these were women that Sheila I had met the first time when I was in jail. She probably doesn't even remember this, during the No Wars protests, when I had been arrested in 1981, and that was when I first met Jennifer as well. And we remember going over on a Sunday to see them in chapel. We all got very religious when we were in jail, because it was the only opportunity when we got a chance to all come together. And Sheila was there at that time, and Bridge and Una as well, and Mary, obviously Mary Doyle was a name that just ran off our tongues, particularly during 1981. And as well as that, we're here tonight with Pat McElfenna, whose husband died as a consequence of his involvement in the struggle in IRA activity. And Marie and I was very, very great friends with Sean McElfenna, and I had the honour of speaking at his last commemoration. And we're here tonight also with Patsy and Rita, and just I want to acknowledge all of those great women that are here with us tonight. And tonight is very special for all of us, because we were, there was a bit of pull in relation to coming here, because we wanted to be here with Catherine, and we also wanted to be in Belfast, where there was a recognition event happening to a powerful woman in our struggle. And that was 40 years ago today. Maura Drum was assassinated. And I know particularly, I want to just acknowledge this in terms of Sinead, because Sinead works very closely with Maura's son, Jamie, who'll be speaking at an event tonight. And to think that Maura Drum was 57 years of age when she was brutally assassinated in a hospital in Belfast, and she left 5 children behind. And I think, her being the Vice President of Sinn Féin, it's also very fitting that the current Vice President of Sinn Féin is a strong Republican woman, Mary Lou McDonald. And I think that's something we all acknowledge. And this year, as Jennifer has said, and just even looking around this room, it's a year of looking back and looking back at 1916. And I know, because I have been at some events with the women in this room, and there's no doubt that when we have been looking at the primary aim, initially of Common Demand, which was, and I'll quote, "to advance the cause of Irish liberty and to organise Irish women in the furtherance of this objective and assist in arming and equipping a body of Irish men for the defence of Ireland." A body of Irish men for the defence of Ireland. A crack. And thankfully, but that changed when Common Demand was integrated into the Army of the Republic. And a number, as we know, and I just want to sort of give recognition here tonight, a number of Common Demand members died, as we know, during the 1916 rising, including volunteer Margareta Keogh, who was shot dead outside the South Dublin Union. And then following, as we know, the surrender, over 70 Common Demand volunteers was arrested and imprisoned in Clonmel jail. And then we had members such as Countess Markovich and Mary McSweeney, Dr. Ada English and Kathleen Clark, who subsequently went on to become TDs. And, we all have lived through with the consequences of the partition of Ireland. And when you think that Ireland was partitioned by only 7 votes, 7 votes, 64 to 57, but it was overwhelmingly rejected by the unmanageable revolutionaries of Common Demand at their convention when they voted 419 against partition and 63 in favour. And these women, and that's why it's important, I think, to locate anything that we're saying in that historical context, because they have been an inspiration to all of us. And after partition, all that we know has been well documented and debated. The British divided Ireland and its people, one against another, with one group acting as a garrison of British power. And we in the north were abandoned. And were abandoned and left to a loyalist garrison, which established a Protestant parliament for a Protestant people, with a financial interest, the police and the other forces of occupation that the British maintained to preserve their rule, the UDA, the UDR, and before that the B Specials. The majority tended to be Protestant. Derry, the city that I was born to, is a majority nationalist city, and my mother's generation lived with gerrymandering, where the majority ruled was by a unionist minority. And the majority Catholic nationalist population, they lived with 2 and 3 families in one house, and they were not afforded the right to vote, and subjected to the brutality from a unionist minority community which ruled the majority on behalf of a unionist political elite in Stormont. And what our parents tolerated, without doubt, our generation could not. And we challenged the oppressive nature of the state. Us croppies refused to lie down. Women like Ethel Lynch and Mairead Farrell were among the greatest resistant fighters who rejected the assurances that we would receive our rightful rewards in heaven. For our generation, heaven could wait.
But we could not, and we would not. We reacted against state oppression, its injustice and its inequalities. We demanded human rights, equality and justice, housing, a job. Civil rights protesters were battered, heads were smashed, bones were broken, but resistance was growing. As we confronted British misrule, the British government sought to propagate the myth all round the world that it was acting to keep the two warring sides apart. The establishment that had happily held power to the exclusion of the majority in Derry and a significant minority in society were not interested in the sharing of it. The state was not for turning, and the civil rights protesters and the movement that sprung up around it were not for turning back. So the Battle of the Bogside began. Our role as children was to keep the bucket of vinegar outside the front door filled and maintain a healthy supply of cloths for those inhaling CS gas. On many occasions that necessitated stripping sheets from the bed and children going to bed without sheets because we didn't have that many of them in our house. And dose those sheets as we cut them up to cloths and vinegar. I was 7 years of age when someone you might have heard of, called Sammy Defenny, was battered outside his front door, and he died as a consequence of his injuries. He was a 43-year-old father of 9 children from the Bogside. Like many other cases involving state killings, his family is still waiting on the results of the official inquiry into his murder 47 years ago. In my own area of the Bogside, Seamus Cusick and Daisy Beatty were shot when I was 8, and by the time I was 9, almost like Jennifer, there had been interment, Bloody Sunday and Operation Motorman. I got my sense of rights and wrongs from the streets where I lived and played, the Lecky Road in the Bogside, with its gable wall now proudly announcing, "You are now entering Free Derry." My father, a Protestant, who converted when he married my mother, died when I was 10. My brother Peter was in Portlaoise jail for IRA activities, and at that stage he was serving what was one of the longest prison sentences of its time, 3 years. My mother was left with 10 children. Still a child, I was helping to cook dinner on a Bogside-style barbecue made of bricks and coal and a firelighter in the centre, and a blackened pot of tasty potatoes and heated beans and fried sausages. And that's what we had to do during the Ulster Workers' Strike of 1972, when there was no electricity or supplies getting into the ghettos of the Bogside or the Falls Road. But our parents at that time had more to concern themselves than feeding hungry children, because during that time hundreds had been hurt and killed with no warning bombings in Dublin and Monaghan. On Fridays I would help my mother collect for the Prisoners Dependent Fund, the PDF. So at age 12, when Longcash burnt, we took to the streets protesting, holding photos of the faces and bruised bodies of those prisoners. I recall hearing the dreadful stories of the hooded men, who now it has only been disclosed what we all already knew. The findings of a letter by Merlin Rees confirming that the British Secretary of State for Defence, Lord Carrington, had sanctioned torture. We knew they were tortured. Little did that young child of 12 know back then that she, a Sinn Féin MEP, would take one of those hooded men cases, Liam Shannon, to the European Human Rights Commissioner, Niels Muizhniak, to expose the lie that the British government told to the European Court of Human Rights. They said it wasn't torture. We proved that it was. And that I would succeed in getting the Commissioner to come to the North to investigate Britain's violation of human rights and its involvement in state killings and collusion. In Belfast, Human Rights Commissioner Niels Muizniak confirmed that the British state acted and continues to act with impunity. At age 16, like many of the women from the north in this room, I had my fill to know that the wrongs had to be righted, so I joined. As did many during the second hunger strike of 1981, I was arrested, charged, and I found myself in Armagh jail, and that's where I first met Jennifer McCann, MLA, who was also a junior minister to Mark McGuinness, and in the sentence wing I met Mairead and Sheila as well. I also met another powerful woman who's not here, who had great influence on me, Mary McConville, who is now a councillor, and great many unimaginary and unmanageable revolutionaries in Armagh jail. And at that time, when I went in, it got me thinking very much about gender inequality. Because prior to my arrest, I had been on the streets daily, every hour of every day that I could, out protesting about what was happening to Mary Doyle and to many of the other prisoners, and the hunger strike that was going on at the time. And our heads were fried. We were trying to do as much as we could to try to shine a bright light on the injustices and what was happening in H Block and Armagh. But I must say, I was ashamed when I went in and when I met the women who were in protest, because it wasn't talked about in the north. It wasn't talked about the fact that during sort of menstrual cycles that there wasn't enough protection women given to the women, because we didn't want to embarrass our male folk. So those things were not talked about. They were hushed up. And upon getting released and having eventually turned up to my trial, I stood in a Belfast court and I listened to, at that stage, the barrister. He gave me two options. He said to me, okay, you need to plead guilty, and if you plead guilty, you'll get a lighter sentence. And if you don't plead guilty, you're going to get 14 years or more. Well, I had a third option. I didn't tell him, but I took it. And we got ourselves out of there. Another girl, Kathleen O'Reilly, and I, who were on bail. And it was OTR, on the run for us. And from the age 18 to 23, I suppose, I'm going to just, in this room, that's going to remain blankety blank. Because as the northern ones will understand, there's not going to be any Boston tapes going to ring for here. So at age 23, I was arrested in Scotland, moved to England, and I was charged, and I spent 13 months in remand in a Brixton prison with 600 men and 2 women, myself and Ella Dwyer. And we were strip searched, sometimes 6 times every day. Ella Dwyer, without doubt, is a fantastic comrade and someone that this constituency should be absolutely proud of. She was the better one of us two. And upon us getting life imprisonment, we were moved from Brixton Prison in London, and we were held in the north of England in a place called Durham Jail. And Durham Jail had a wing within a Malloy-Man's prison. But at that stage we were going into, we had hoped, to more women because of the conditions of the isolation of the two of us in Brixton Prison. When we went to Durham Prison, I have to say it's sort of not funny, but at the time Ella and I concluded that it was almost like the one flew over the cuckoo's nest. Because most of the women there should have been in mental health institutions. They needed that kind of care. They shouldn't have been in Durham Prison. And many of them would cut up and cut their wrists and self-harm and take their lives, and it really was a shocking place to live in. We were often hungry. in the place, and we were fed a diet of white cabbage for dinner every day. To this day, I cannot eat white cabbage. So if anybody's ever sitting me down for something to eat, never put white cabbage on my plate. But I have to say that it did cure my fear of cockroaches, because we had a choice. If we wanted to go to a Durham-style gym, not the gym that you and I would know, but at least it was a room that you could go and try and do a little bit of exercise, we had to literally shovel up cockroaches into a black bag. And at night in the cells, we had to end up turning up the radio really, really loud, because an army of cockroaches would overrun the ring. We slopped out there daily. We had no toilets in cells. And we had a very archaic system, sewage system, and every winter in life, every year, every winter, it froze. And every day of every winter, it regurgitated all of the waste that was put from the potties, and they all landed out on the landing in the area where they had the table and chairs for us to eat for breakfast. So the women were given buckets and spades, like we were in the beach, and we were asked to scoop it all up into the buckets and spades and put it away into these big sort of containers. And then if you did that, you were rewarded with a Mars bar. So those of us who protested, Ellen and I, we would be locked up and put in punishment for weeks and months on end because we refused to scoop it all up. And they used to develop a list, and we call it a shit list. For this list, if your name is on that list, that was your day and your turn to scoop it all up. But we eventually managed, after protesting and writing out and telling people about the conditions in which we were held in, we eventually managed to get headline news one morning on the English news. And there was promise of a major refurbishment of Hitchwing. And no sooner had the news come on, of course Emma and I was taken out of the cells and we were put in punishment again. But we went in as high as kites, because we knew that we had, at least with the only weapon we had at the time, which was a pen, and we had been campaigning and torturing as many people as we could. So after a year of refurbishment, we ended up with pristine toilets and sinks and cells and a fumigation system that definitely got rid of the cockroaches, but the food didn't improve. So for many of us Republican women that are here this evening, and for many, many more, prisons were without doubt the universities of struggle. And I went in with no academic qualifications, but I came out after 13 and a half years with a first-class honours degree, computer and administrative skills, and many, many other qualifications, because I used every hour of every day I could to make the system work for us, and that we would be able to then use that in the Republican struggle in the years ahead. But I think those of us that are all here tonight, particularly as we look at the picture of Mairead Farrell and the other one of Marge Rum, we know how lucky we are, because we're here to be in a place like this, in a setting like this, to be able to share our experiences with you all. But we know the horrors of war. Wars are terrible things, and people should not try to romanticise about wars. And we were very clear, but we didn't start this one. This war came to us. But we were determined that we were going to be the generation that was going to end it, and with a permanent resolution to conflict, a peace process, which shines without doubt like a beacon light for, and you can look at Colombia and you just hear what Santos said last week when he was getting the Nobel Peace Prize, that it was the Irish peace process that had influenced the Colombian peace process. And when you look at the Good Friday Agreement, wasn't a Republican document, we all know that. But the fact that Sinn Féin was involved in the Good Friday Agreement and the negotiations, and as Jennifer has outlined some of what took place there, we secured significantly more progress in the areas of policing and justice, demilitarisation in arms, discrimination and sectarianism, equality, human rights, the Irish language, and constitutional matters. Indeed, equality is mentioned 21 times in the Good Friday Agreement, where it didn't get a single mention in the Sunningdale Agreement. And then they says that the Good Friday Agreement was for slow learners, because they says Sunningdale was just the same. Nothing could be further from the truth. And all of that I mentioned was important to all of us prisoners who were still in jail, because we didn't go to jail so that our negotiators, so Jennifer and others and people that were out there involved in the negotiations, would just be able to have a negotiation that was going to get us released. That's not what we went to jail for. The circumstances that took us to jail had to change. And therefore, that's what the Good Friday Agreement provided us with an opportunity. And since my release from prison, I have been actively involved in the political struggle. I've been taking on whatever task that has been asked of me. And I've had a motto all of my adult life. If it has to be, it's up to me. Never ask anyone to do anything that you're not prepared to do yourself. And that's why I've ended up in England. And I think it's also why I ended up as an MEP. Because, without doubt, when we look at what has happened in our struggle, as has been said by Jennifer and others, you look around this room and you see all of the Republican women, and I've named some of them, who have played their part in different phases of the struggle. However, when we look at, for instance, at people like Elizabeth O'Farrell, who walked along with Patrick Pearse up to the line and give the Republicans surrender, and then we look at the photograph of what emerged of that particular historic moment. And what do we see of Elizabeth O'Farrell? Her shoe. She was airbrushed out of history. That's all that they left, was her shoe. So maybe, as Jennifer is saying, 100 years on, we have to ask ourselves, has things changed an awful lot? And, without doubt, there's still an awful lot more that needs done. Because despite Mairead Farrell and Maura Drum and Ethel Lynch and Patricia Black, and the names are just sort of can pop through your head, and despite we're standing here tonight, 40 years to the day that Maura Drum was assassinated. When we look at all of that, and the number of women, of which I was one, who was released from prison after serving life, with our biological clocks having stopped, couldn't have children, and there are many, many more like me, our roles have still been depicted as somewhat being subservient to our male counterparts. And apart, without doubt, of a few notable exceptions, we too have largely been written out of history. And whilst you could probably fill a small library with autobiographies and historical accounts of the contribution of male Republicans throughout the different phases of our struggle, there is little written about the very significant role played by women. But we have to change that, and it's events like this, Catherine, that allow us maybe an opportunity to exchange some views and just to recount some of our own experiences. But something has always struck me from the city that I come from in Derry, because along the wall of a place called McGee campus, there was a slogan which paraphrased Patrick Pearse's famous comments at the grave of Donovan Rossa. And it read, "Women on free will never be at peace." So if we are really talking about achieving justice and equality and human rights in a 32-county democratic socialist republic, women have to be free. But there's one thing for sure, comrades. The only people that can free us is ourselves. So, go míle mé agus go léir.